I'm Rhodri Jones. I'm a director at Rural Advisor. I initially trained as a solicitor and spent about 10 years working mainly in agricultural law. And since that, I have drifted over towards being an advisor on succession, business planning, and particularly joint ventures. And I also spend most of my time running a dairy farm at the minute. So employment law sort of fits into that history I've got, and also to advising on businesses at the minute. And I'm hopefully going to speak to you about a few important things that we've picked out along the way, and things to bear in mind. And I was thinking, right, how am I going to make this, relevant to what's happening at the minute? And I think looking at some concepts of minimum standards required from the industry, it's really important that we as farming businesses familiarise ourselves with the requirements of employing people, because it's becoming more and more prevalent. We need labour, and we keep hearing about the labour shortage in farming, loads of different sectors, and we need to look at what it takes to attract those people into farming from outside the industry, what we're competing with, and also then keeping those within the industry happy, work-life balance and everything else that we keep hearing a bit more about now, importantly, my dad. So perhaps a few of the requirements that I'm going to just outline might take some by surprise. But I do think it's a good time to be looking at all this and how we make the job of farming and the job of assisting on farms interesting. So first of all, we look at employment status. So we maybe are familiar with employees, self-employed, but you've also got workers, you've got casual and agency workers as well, and they all have different rights. And whatever status we use or attribute to someone, we need to make sure that they're treated in the right way, that the rights apply. But also we can see that people can shift from one status to the other unintentionally as well. So we'll go through that now. First of all, we have worker. So worker, it's kind of a base level in terms of rights afforded to someone who works for you. And to be a worker, you can see there has to be a contract of employment, and it's a personal commitment to do that work, i.e. they turn up personally to work. It's not that they are contracted with you to provide services and anybody else can turn up. So it's essentially that person's personal contract. The rights in the box there set out some of the most important rights workers have. We got itemised pay statement in terms of what you can deduct from wages. They need the national minimum wage, holiday pay, and also pension auto-enrolment as well. So it's a certain level of rights that are guaranteed to a worker. And often we see workers, they're seen in zero contract hours. That's what a worker is in most terms. So the 0 hours contract, it's extremely flexible. It could be 10 hours one week, 30 the next, 0 the week after. And they would be classed as a worker then. We will see as we go on, we need to make sure that if it's a worker that we're employing, and if it's a worker that we're expecting to employ, that what happens day to day or week to week doesn't morph them, if you like, into an employee that gives them enhanced rights as well. So what you've got down on paper and what you do week to week is quite important in terms of how you can, inadvertently transfer someone to be an employee. So employees then, this is the next level up, if you like, and the rights build upon those which are afforded to a worker. It's more costly to employ an employee. There are more rights involved with them, in enhanced rights, but that's fine if you've planned for it. But as I say, the drift from worker to employee can, bring with it far more expense than you intended to if it's unintended. So again, we need a contract of employment to be put in place, stating that the person is an employee. But rather sort of confusingly or unhelpfully, it's not a single test. It's more a look at the circumstances surrounding how that person is involved in the business. So, given that it's based on circumstances, example is probably the best way of highlighting the difference. As I mentioned, workers, often 0 hours contract. So for example, they work 0 hours this week, you give them 10 the next week, then 30, then back to 20, whatever the business demands, and the worker provides a service, and the worker remains a worker. Example in farming, maybe crop pickers. The weather's good one week, they go flat out, then the next week, they maybe not. But you can also have someone in that situation that's on a 3-month fixed contract. Well, that's an employee then. So it's really important to take advice on what you need for your particular business, and that the paperwork and actually what's happening on the ground is matching up. Otherwise, you risk tipping someone over into a class of a status that gives them far more rights, such as time off in various circumstances that you maybe didn't intend to do. So get it right at the start and make sure that what's called custom and practice doesn't change that status. Self-employed, yeah, fairly familiar with this sort of concept in farming, I would imagine. Yeah, so it's a self-employed person or an independent contractor providing services to a customer or client. So the farmer then becomes a customer or client, and then there's no rights in respect of employment law that would afford it to workers or employees there. We quite often see self-employed people in agriculture, don't we? Yeah, it suits people to work a little bit from home maybe, or work for different people. And you may have twigged, the same thing can happen with self-employed and workers. How many self-employed workers are working the same hours every week, the same days every week, and are really dictated to by the boss when they come in and when they come out? Now, is that really a self-employed person, or has he tipped to becoming a worker or maybe even an employee? Yeah. So it's really important that what we do and who has control and what happens sort of between the people reflects what you want it to be. Now, the cynic might say, well, self-employment is quite nice because you don't have to pay PAYE and you don't have to get them on a pension or anything like that. It's a cheap way of getting someone in. But definitely, if the relationship doesn't stack up, and particularly you've still got people on farm who are self-employed, but they're working 5 days a week on one farm. Yeah, that's not going to cut it really. It's a different relationship to what you are saying it is. So if that relationship was ever tested, you're probably going to find that there's maybe a lot of rights and a lot of NI contributions and that sort of stuff that maybe should have been made for a long period of time. So that's quite a whistle-stop tour really of the 3 main classifications and what the implications they have on the business. Next up, agricultural wages orders. So this is a specific set of rules for employing people in the agricultural sector, and they're basically, regardless of status, worker, employee, it's basic requirements for the businesses to provide. And what I've done here is I've tried to take the most important, the biggest issues basically out of the guidance and highlight them, and there may well be quite a few that we're not aware of. So firstly, there's a specific agricultural minimum wage, and to work that out we look at someone's age, experience, qualifications, and they're then graded A, B, C, D. The wage will be the greater of either the agricultural minimum wage or the national living wage, because sometimes it can be either or. And there's info in the guidance to the order to help you work out what level somebody should be at, depending on what qualifications and experience they've got, and particularly with regard to apprenticeships and things, what qualifies and what doesn't. So there's a criteria, and people should be paid in accordance with that. The next box then, down on the left there, the order's quite prescriptive about sort of add-ons and deductions as well. So there's, you may not be aware of this, but there is an allowance to take away for accommodation, which is probably understood. But there's a dog allowance as well. Yeah, there's about, I think it's about £9.26 a week. So if you're asking somebody to bring dogs on to shepherd, essentially there's an allowance for that. And on-call allowance if they're the ones on call, or weekend or whatever, and then there's a night work supplement as well. So all these need to be calculated when we're working out either the wage or if it's a salary basis, to make sure that we aren't sort of underdoing anyone on this one. So they're all set out, it's just for us to understand it. And finally, overtime. Okay, everyone thinks of overtime as the big hours or weekends or maybe bank holidays. But the reality is, you know, by law, it kicks in after 8 hours. And you can soon get to 8 hours with an early start, can't you? You know, you're talking middle of the afternoon. Yeah, so that's one thing to watch out for. And they say the best practice is to pay time and a half in most overtime circumstances as well. You can specify weekends as normal working hours in your contract, but again, it's getting that contract right from the start and following through on it in what you do day to day as well. If you've got any questions, just ask if we can stop or we can deal with them at the end. Next one, okay, so agricultural sick pay. This is, again, a right in agricultural wages order, right to anyone, but there's certain types of illnesses or injuries, for example, that are excluded. If you suffer an injury outside of the place of work, for example, that's not covered by the agricultural sick pay. So it's best to probably look at that and make sure that what you've got in your contracts reflect that sort of stuff. But again, probably people getting workers in on self-employed and sort of stuff, trying to avoid sick pay. Well, this applies, you know, to anyone on the farm. So be mindful of that. Holiday entitlement. How many workers take holiday? And a bit of a foreign concept. Yeah, it's quite a lot, isn't it? If you think about it, if someone is in that sort of category there, working Monday to Friday, maybe a Saturday as well, yeah, that's 35 days holiday entitlement, and that including public holidays as well. So, but it's quite significant. I can guarantee that very few sort of farm workers would be taking that, or would be even aware of that sort of number. Yeah, I think at that level you could probably buy 10 back, so you could pay in lieu of 10, but the rest essentially to be taken. So it's quite a significant number of days that has to be worked in somehow. Not saying any of these things are easy, but you know, it's what's there in the order. And finally, on this point, training costs. We've got employers to meet the agreed cost of training, but also the employers to meet the costs of moving up from one grade to the other after a certain amount of time. So you're allowed to ask your employers essentially to help you to progress from one grade to the next, to increase that income, to increase your wage. Okay. Finally then, I appreciate this has been a quick sort of whistle-stop tour through it. I just thought I'd mention a couple of things. I picked these particular things out from Red Tractor, just because that's the one I had in front of me. But there's more and more sort of, they call them personnel-based issues now cropping up in farm assurance, and it's mainly to do with the competence of people working on farm, so making sure that people are trained correctly, and just like with any other assurance, that training has to be documented as well. Okay, so to make sure that people are competent, they have training records, and all that sort of stuff as well. And also, quite recently, the health and safety policy requirements have increased as well, again, keeping the people on farm safe. So when I was putting this together, and as I said at the start, it was with the idea of looking at the labour shortage in agriculture. So we've distinguished between the different statuses, which will hopefully allow you as employers to choose, manage, prepare, and also to keep people within the statuses that the business requires them to be. And make sure that your daily practice or the daily demands of the people don't tip them over into a different category that gives more rights than is intended to be in that relationship. But having said that, we've also had a look at what is required from the employer, and really, you know, these are the bits in the order that we've gone through. Those are minimums, you know, and we are competing with other industries now. As difficult as it may be to find the budget to do these things, we're competing with other industries like construction and anything else, you know, that takes labour away from farming, it's quite difficult to attract that workforce, isn't it, unless the conditions and the rights are respected. So, I mean, you often see the same adverts come up again and again and again, asking maybe for farm workers to be working 13 days out of 14, you know, and there's little wonder probably that those are being re-advertised again and again and again. It's not going to happen, is it? So, those positions will remain unfilled, you know, in this day and age. I think we have to make farming an excellent sector to work in, and it probably starts with us as employers recognising what the staff are entitled to and making those working conditions as attractive as we can. That's it for me. Hopefully that's been a quick look at what you need to be looking out for as a business, but also what we need to aspire to get people into the industry as well. Diolch yn fawr.